Here's a short clip of Jordan Peterson talking with billionaire, investor, entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy as he explains the unholy alliance between the woke left and famed Wall Street firm BlackRock.
How did BlackRock come to be so dominant? How did they manage to leverage themselves into a position like this?
Yes, so it's a long story. I start to tell it in my first book. That there's two halves. There's two halves to the story. One is the top-down cynical version. That's the version I told in Woke Inc., and that's half the story. The second of it relates to our culture and the cultural and generational moment we live in, because it takes two to tango. Consumers have to fall for it. What are the conditions that allow consumers to fall for it? That's the subject of my most recent book, Nation of Victims, which relates to our culture of our general populace that left our population vulnerable to the trick. But let me start with the first. I mean, on the realist side here, the top-down version of this, what happened was on the back of the 2008 financial crisis. And by the way, I lived this. I got my first job in New York City at a prominent hedge fund on the eve of the 2008 financial crisis. I had somewhat of a front row seat to this. What happened is that Wall Street and financial institutions and big banks, big business more broadly, but financial institutions in particular, went from being the heroes of modern capitalism to becoming the bad guys. Okay, Occupy Wall Street was knocking on Wall Street's doorstep. The new version of the barbarians were at the gate, and they were barricading the gate. They were barraging the gate. Okay, now there was a trick that came up right around the same time that the Occupy Wall Street movement was saying, you know what, we need to take money from those wealthy corporate fat cats and redistribute it to poor people to help poor people. There was the birth of this new strand on the left that started to say, well, it wasn't quite just economic injustice or just poverty that we need to address. It's also racial injustice and misogyny and bigotry and climate change and the racially disparate impact of climate change. That's actually the real problem. And that's when Wall Street woke up, where they said, wait a minute, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity of a generation to say that, okay, we can do that. We'll talk about systemic racism if you stop talking about systemic financial risk. Right? We'll talk about, muse about the racially disparate impact of climate change after we fly in a private jet to Davos. We'll do that all day long. But we expect that the new left work with that old left and come to a bargain where you agree to look the other way and leave our game intact, as long as we use our game, our power, corporate power included, to advance some of the agendas that you all love. So it was this cynical arranged marriage between two bedfellows who didn't really love each other. It was closer to mutual prostitution than an arranged marriage. But the net result was the birth of this hybrid of state power and corporate power that together was more powerful than either one alone. That was whether you want to call it the woke industrial complex, the E.S.G. industrial complex. That was what through kerosene.
Just call it fascism.
You could call it fascism.
Yeah, you could, because
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what fascism means. Fascism means the
classical
union
definition.
of people at the top. Yeah.
The merger of state power and corporate power to advance what neither one could alone. This is a modern fascism, no doubt about it. So